There is no imposition argument. There's not. Well, there's an argument, but it doesn't have 2 feet to stand on. And so why does Gary say that I'm playing word games? Because without the imposition argument, he doesn't have much to work on. So what does he do? He yells a lot. He demands that we view the world in terms of an imposition. He demands it because it's a cornerstone. It's not the complete argument, but it's a cornerstone. So why does the imposition argument fail? Well, let's see. An imposition is a burden that is placed on a subject, not a definition of the subject. The subject has to exist prior to it being imposed upon. Find one example or definition that differs from this. Just try to separate yourself from your life and still retain a subject. So once again, I say that the anti-natalist argument is connotatively negative out of the gate due to their use of this improper imposition argument. This is due to an imposition being a burden. A burden has negative value. So the argument is one to say life is a burden, or life has burdens within it. In any case, this is the premise. And so, if life is a burden, then it is easy to equate the Buddhist philosophy that life is suffering. The equivalence is much different than saying life is a container which houses suffering. So, even if one wrongly grants life is an imposition argument, they wrongly make life an equivalent to imposition as opposed to simply a container for it. This argument with this negative premises allows for further negatives to follow, such as life is suffering, life is painful. Before you know it, life is negative comes as a conclusion. Connotatively negative premises, connotative negative conclusion. One says that the act of volition on the part of the parents makes life an imposition. Even with volition, the fact of life's presence does not constitute that the subject has had life imposed upon it, for the subject is a life. Once again, something has to first be in order to be imposed upon. The anti-natalist argument starts without a being, and then by its mere presence, one is defined as being imposed upon. If anything is true, a proper definition of imposition would have a child imposing upon life, not life imposing upon the child. The fact of your being is not an imposition, it's a consequence. I'm not distorting language, I'm policing it. Notice how saying life is a consequence is much more benign and true than the value-laden phrase, life is an imposition. The real distorters of language are the anti-natalists themselves, for without the imposition argument, they cannot create fictional states of non-existence in order to value higher than the fact of existing. Their logic doesn't fail, but becomes static. Imagine saying that the frame is imposed upon the bicycle. Would this be proper to say? Of course not. There would be no bicycle without the frame. The frame is an attribute of the bicycle. Such is similar with regards to referring to life being imposed upon the individual. Life is an attribute of the individual, not a component to be placed upon it. So that's the argument. The imposition argument requires an existence, an existing thing to be imposed upon. And if you say this is not the case, find any dictionary definition of imposition that points to something that does not exist, or points to a faculty or an attribute of itself, saying that it imposes upon itself. Life may be a container which houses imposition, but life itself is not an imposition. A child is not an imposition of the parents. It's a consequence of the parents. So, back to, Gary demanding that we view things from a particular vantage point in order to say that life is suffering, life is an imposition. And so if you do grant that life is an imposition, then you already have connotatively made that negative move, and that's a premises. So Gary said, where? Point to where? I don't think you can point to where. Well, I'm pointing to the imposition argument itself as you guys are using it. If you don't look at imposition as something that occurs within life, as opposed to being life itself, then you've grievously made an error. The imposition argument is by itself kind of a word game, and the word game is facilitated by Benatar, and it's perpetrated by Gary, and then it's followed by, well, who? At least 50 people. I mean, he gets more views than that, but as far as his followers are concerned, about 50 people. So feel free to argue, leave me comments if you disagree, and thanks for your time.